So a scale is just a set of pitches that we decide to use to create a melody and harmony within a song. That's all. It's just saying we have all of these pitches in the whole world we could use. We're going to narrow that down into one little set of pitches that we're going to then use to create our music. It's kind of like if you were coloring a page, you're not going to use every single crayon in the entire box. You're going to narrow it down to the ones that fit this particular picture that you're coloring. Now, there are a ton of different scales we could use, but today we're going to focus on just the major scale. The major scale plays a huge part in the music that we listen to, and if we understand the major scale, everything else makes so much more sense. To build a major scale, we really have to understand whole steps and half steps, and to do that, I'm going to take us over to the keyboard here so that you can see this. Okay, so say we're looking at the piano here. We have a set of keys. Now in Western music theory, we have from C up to C is an octave. So the frequency of this note, which is C, is double the frequency of this note. So our brains just interpret them as the same note. Now in Western music history, we've taken this scale from C to C, and we've divided it up into 12 little sections. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 before we start over with the same pattern. Now each one of these little 12 segments is called a half step. So on the piano keyboard, it's really easy to see these half steps because it's just the two keys that are directly next to each other. So going from C to C sharp is a half step because there's no other key in between those two. A whole step, on the other hand, is going to have a key in between. So it's like going from C to D. We have two half steps put together and then we take out this middle key. So to build a major scale, we're actually going to start with what we call a tetrachord. These tetrachords can be traced back all the way back to the Greeks when they were tuning their 4-string lyres. But for us, a tetrachord today is 4 notes, tetra meaning 4, so 4 notes put together in a certain pattern of whole steps and half steps. So we're going to start with C here, and we're going to go up one whole step to D, and then another whole step, and then a half step. That's our tetrachord right here. So the pattern of a tetrachord is whole step, half step. So from C to D, then E, and then F, that's going to be your first tetrachord in a major scale. Now a major scale is actually 2 tetrachords put together. The second tetrachord starts right here on G. So if I go from G to A, that is one whole step. From A to B is another whole step. And then from B to C, that is your half step right there. So if I take these 2 tetrachords, these 4 notes down here, and then these 4 notes up here, and I put them together with a whole step right here in the middle, then I get my major scale. The cool thing about a major scale is that if we think about it as these sets of 2 tetrachords, we can actually take just the second tetrachord and use that to make our next major scale. So if I start on G and I play my first tetrachord, and then I go up one whole step and build another tetrachord here, I'm going to get D, E, a whole step from E is going to be an F sharp, and then going to G. So this is going to be my second tetrachord of the G major scale. And guess what? We had to add 1 sharp. We had to add that F sharp. That F sharp happens to be the first sharp in the order of sharps. And guess what? The pattern continues. So I start on D and I go up my first tetrachord. And then I go up a whole step and do my second tetrachord. Whole step. Whole step is going to give me a C sharp and then a D. Well, guess what? C sharp is the second sharp in the order of sharps. This is where the order of sharps comes from. We can continue this pattern and every tetrachord we add is going to add 1 more sharp. And we're going to keep adding 1 more sharp every time until we end up filling in the whole order of sharps. We could also do this going backwards. So if I start up here with my tetrachord, but then I go backwards and build a tetrachord 1 whole step down. Well, 1 whole step down from C is a B flat. So if I go backwards and go B flat, there's my half step, then a whole step, then a whole step. Then I just built my F major scale. So I could go And guess what? I just added my first flat. That B flat is the first flat in the order of flats. And the same pattern applies with flats. So if I go down one whole step from this, I end up with E flat. Guess what? That's my second flat in the order of flats. So you don't really need to think about these in tetrachords. You really can just think of it as one 8-note scale. But just remember, the pattern is going to be whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. If you can remember that, you can build a major scale off of any note on the whole piano. Let's try actually writing it out. The first step I want to do is to go through and make sure I have 8 notes in ascending order, not duplicating any of them. So if I start with A flat and I fill in all 8 notes up to the next A flat, and then I go through and I check and say, okay, I need the right number of whole steps and half steps. So from A flat, one whole step up would be a B flat, not a B natural. So I would need to add the flat there. From a B flat to a C, that is a whole step. That's great. I'm going to leave it as is. From a C to a D, that's a whole step, but I need it to be a half step. So I'm going to add in my D flat. Then from a D flat to an E, that's a whole step plus a half step, so I'm going to need to flat that E to make it a whole step. From E flat to F, that's a whole step. That's great. We want that. From F to G, that's another whole step. That's great. But then I need my half step. So from G to A flat, that is a half step, and that's where it should be. Then I can take a look at my key or my scale here and say, okay, what sharps or flats do I have in this scale? Now that I've figured out all the whole steps and half steps, I'm going to take those sharps or those flats and I'm going to move them over to the front and put them in the order of sharps or flats, depending on what you're working with, to create your key signature. So if I take all the flats from A flat major and I move them over to the beginning of the staff here and I put them in the order of flats, which would be B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, now I have my key signature. Now I don't need to add those accidentals to the scale when I'm writing my piece. I just know, because I can look at the key signature at the beginning, that those are the flats I'm dealing with, and those are going to apply to everything else across the whole page. Now, one of the really common mistakes that I see with my students is that they'll start building the scale with whole steps and half steps without writing out all of the notes first. So in the case of A flat major, they might start with A flat and then go up a whole step, and that would take them to B flat. And then they'd go up another whole step to C, but then they need to go up another half step. And instead of going up to D flat, a lot of times I'll have students who go up to C sharp instead. Well, there's a couple problems with that. Now, C sharp and D flat might sound the same, but ultimately we're trying to make this as easy as possible for the person reading the music. So if someone were to try and read this music, they might see a C natural and a C sharp in the same measure, and that can be really confusing. Do I play a C sharp? Do I play a C natural? There are rules for that, but then we'd have to add a lot of accidentals probably, going back and forth. It just becomes a lot easier for the musician if we can keep all of the notes within the key signature. Okay, so do you really need to know your major scales to play music? Honestly, no. You can learn a song, you can learn a whole piece, you can learn a whole instrument for years without really knowing how to build a major scale. A lot of people do it. Here's the key though. Music is all about patterns. Music is just finding the patterns of sound and being able to organize them into something original, something creative that you have created yourself. People have been using these patterns for years, for centuries. The more familiar we are with the patterns, the quicker we're going to be able to learn music, and the quicker we're going to be able to create our own music. That's really what music theory is all about anyway. It's just about creating better music. So if you want to become a better musician or a better composer, learn the patterns. Start practicing your major scales. Practice them in every key so that you know the patterns in every key. And of course, if this has been helpful for you, please subscribe for more music theory pro tips. We'll see you later.